Blog Talk Radio.
I saw a cloud today. I watched it change its shape into a dinosaur, a whale, a mermaid, and a plane. The mermaid was pregnant, and then it turned into a Doberman, and the Doberman just turned back into the sky. Then I saw a real plane flying awfully low, man, dropping toxic chemicals all over my town. It says to help us, but they're just trying to hold us down and try and take away our clouds and replace them with their own. Crop dust in downtown, they say it's the ozone, but they don't care about your home. They're just trying out new ways of population control. We're young and we're bold. We can throw away their laws and replace them with our own. And the story will be told about the group of young adults who overthrew the throne, shone a light on just how bright this world can surely shine. Utopia works conceptually, but even in reality, to overthrow the state, we all gotta be in the right state of mind. I saw a bird today, I watched it fly away, and in my heart I knew I had to do the same. The town's really gotten to me, the streets smell rotten to me, and I still can't stand those goddamn fucking planes. But they're only flying now, someday they'll be bombing towns. They already started a secret chemical war. They've taken all we had and still want more. Sky is saturated with rain, I swear I'm not insane. It's going to pour, it's going to pour. So don't you use no phone, because the government can bug anybody's home. So don't walk the streets alone, because they might steal you in the night without your family being told. But we're young and we're bold, and we can throw away their laws and replace them with our own. And the story will be told about the group of young adults who overthrew the throne, shone a light on just how bright this world could surely shine. Utopia works conceptually, but even in reality, to overthrow the state, we all gotta be in the right state of mind. We all gotta be in the right state of mind. There's no telling just how far we can climb if we're just in the right state of mind.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in once again to Universal Truth Evolution on blogtalkradio.com. I am your host, once again, Jerry Avalos, bringing you all the information and news that major media tends to shy away from for one reason or another. And I'm very excited about today's guest, who is Dr. Heisch, who has written a book, amongst others, called The God Theory, having to do with consciousness and physics, really. And I'm sure it's going to be a very informative interview here with a lot of different questions I'm sure I have myself, as well as I know many in the audience might have too. So feel free to post those questions in the chat room or give us a call if you want to talk to Doctor yourself. So Dr. Heisch, how's it going?
Going just fine. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing outstanding. Thank you. Rather than try to go into what you do, just looking into your bio and seeing your work, it'd probably be best just to give our audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you're doing these days.
Sure, just a little bit. I got my PhD at the University of Wisconsin in Madison in astronomy and astrophysics. Then spent the next 30 years doing primarily NASA-funded research projects with space satellites and modeling data. So it's been a very interesting career in astrophysics, but at the same time I also spent a lot of time thinking about spiritual things because my original background was as someone who went into a seminary. I actually entered a seminary when I was in my freshman year of college. And so I had both of these interests in mind when I was younger, the spiritual side of things and the world of science. Managed to have a career in the world of science, but during that time I also did a lot of thinking about the deeper questions, and finally came up with 2 books that were published in the last 4 years. One was the God Theory, and the other was The Purpose Guided Universe, Believing in Einstein, Darwin, and God, and that just came out this year. So that's a bit of background.
Great, and I know this forefront of science is obviously the big focus these days, because how of that spiritual side and the scientific now kind of, if we will, sort of coming together, whether they like it or not. And so research like what you're doing and how you're presenting it, I think it's invaluable really to what's going on. And and I think the basic understanding of physics, I think, needs to come more into play of understanding our metaphysical selves, if you will. So it just helps all of us manifest what we want. And so that's why I love your perspective on consciousness. So if you would, elaborate how you feel consciousness interacts with this physical reality.
Well, the deep question is, what is the real aspect of existence? Is it that we are physical bodies and material entities that somehow generate something we think of as consciousness in the brain? Or is it, as the metaphysical traditions tell us, the other way around, that somehow consciousness is the very first primary thing, probably the very stuff of God, if you want to call it that, and it's everything that derives from that somehow? That, of course, is quite the opposite from the perspective you take as a scientist, where you assume that the world is made up of matter and you can understand things by breaking something down into its little pieces and looking at what those pieces do. That's called reductionism, by the way. Mm-hmm. So this view of scientific reductionist materialism says, no, there can't be anything like consciousness that really exists. It's all just what would be called an epiphenomenon, so it's sort of a mistake. You think you're thinking, but in fact, it's all just a bit of brain chemistry. And I don't think that's correct, but that's the mainstream perspective.
Yeah, and what have you found in your research and study that you would kind of point to that say that I don't believe that to be correct?
Well, there are 2 aspects of this. One emerging from within astrophysics, and that has to do with the fact that we pretty much live in a life-friendly universe, and that's certainly what we're talking about during the program today. There are a whole bunch of laws of nature and constants of nature that, for all we know, could have been radically different, and if they were, we wouldn't be here. So there's this huge problem of trying to understand why the universe is apparently life-friendly. And, we can talk about that. The other side of things comes from the micro world, from the world of quantum mechanics, where it's becoming ever more evident that consciousness plays a role in measurement at the quantum level, that you can't even have a quantum measurement take place without an observer producing a measurement. Mm-hmm. So the role of consciousness in both the realm of the small and the quantum realm and in the realm of the whole universe and its properties, I think there's ample evidence that there's some kind of an intelligence behind it all. And not having anything to do, by the way, with intelligent design. I'm not at all talking about intelligent design. I'm talking about the possibility of a universe being created whose laws of physics are the ideas of a creator. A very different kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there, because by evidence alone, one can do even with their own experiment. You can kind of see that there seems to be some sort of a dimensional I want to say higher dimensional kind of influence. One can say, just without a better relation. You can make empirical data that would say there's some kind of intelligence, be it whatever you want to call it, that seems to orchestrate things in a sense. So, and one of the things I know how you're saying at the quantum level, I know one of the widely talked about but not necessarily fully understood experiments that people point to for this is the double slit experiment, and I was hoping that maybe that you can help all of us really understand the implications of that, because I think to some they might don't really get how that really matters about of seeing having the observer really affect what's going on.
Well, in fact, let me give you. There are several quantum examples we can talk about, and I think we have plenty of time to do so.
Yeah.
Let me give you something right out of my book. This will be kind of amusing.
Cool.
It's right out of my book, and it'll take a few minutes, but I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
It's called An Ideal Quantum Experiment. If any of your listeners have the book handy, it's on page 51 of the book. And I'm just going to read from it. Let's examine a quantum experiment devised by 3 preeminent geniuses of theoretical physics. Dr. Moe, Dr. Larry, and Professor Curley. Does it ring a bell? Professor Curley has devised machines that slice or chop pennies in half, either slicing or chopping. So I define a slice to be a cut lengthwise through a penny. So that we wind up with two thin coins. One has a profile of Abraham Lincoln on one side and nothing on the back. The other coin has a Lincoln Memorial on one side and nothing on the back. And so can you picture a coin sliced down the middle that way? With Lincoln on one side and nothing on the back, and then the back half of the coin being the other half. A chop, on the other hand, is very different. It results in two half-moon-shaped pennies. So in this case, one of the pennies would have Lincoln's head, the other Lincoln's shoulders. So there are two ways to chop a penny, or you can slice or chop a penny. Now, Professor Curley, being the genius that he is, has two versions of the slicing and chopping machine. One is a classical model and one a quantum model. So experiment 1. Professor Curley uses the classical machine to slice the penny, which means down the middle. The machine, being quite sophisticated, puts one sliced coin in one envelope addressed to Dr. Moe and one in another addressed to Dr. Larry, and labels both of the envelopes sliced. So Professor Curley takes the envelopes out of the machine, puts them in the mailman, out for the mailman to pick up, and then goes to take a nap. Well, the next day, Dr. Moe lives in Stoogeburg, and Dr. Larry, who lives 100 miles away in Stoogeville, they both get envelopes in the mail. Dr. Moe expects to find a sliced penny inside, because that is how the envelope is labeled. So he opens his envelope, and sure enough, there's a sliced coin inside. And it's got Lincoln's profile on one side. So he calls his colleague, Dr. Larry, who is still asleep, and sure enough, when he gets his envelope out of the mailbox, it contains the backside of the original coin, the Lincoln Memorial. So Dr. Moe calls Professor Curley and yells at him, saying, "Listen, Puddinhead, what kind of silly experiment was that? I got half a coin and Larry got the other half. What does that prove?" To which Professor Curley responds, "Yuck, yuck, yuck, you ain't seen nothing yet." So it's experiment 2 time. Professor Curley sets the classical machine to chop. Once again, the machine goes to work and turns out 2 half-moon-shaped coins. Puts one in each of the 2 envelopes labeled chopped and addresses them to Dr. Moe and Dr. Larry. Well, the next day, Dr. Moe finds an envelope labeled chopped in his mailbox. Expecting to find a chopped penny inside, sure enough, he discovers one with Lincoln's head. He calls his colleague, Dr. Larry, who checks his mailbox and finds another envelope labeled chopped, and sure enough, he's got the other half of the coin with Lincoln's shoulders. So Dr. Moe calls Professor Curley and yells, "Oh, a wise guy, huh? What kind of silly experiment was that?" Professor Curley stops him. "Well, wait till you see the next experiment." So it's time for experiment number 3. This time, Professor Curley fires up the quantum machine. He inserts a coin in the machine. It hums and whirs, and then spits out 2 sealed envelopes. This time, though, the envelopes are not labeled sliced or chopped. Instead, they are labeled quantum. The mailman picks them up. Well, the next day, Dr. Moe finds an envelope labeled quantum in his mailbox. Just then, Professor Curley calls him up. Curley says, "Hey, Moe, did you get that quantum envelope I sent you?" Moe says, "Yeah, and I'm about to open it." Curley says, "Don't do that yet. First, you've got to decide whether that envelope contains a sliced or a chopped coin." Moe says, "Are you nuts? Your machine already sliced or chopped it. I can't change that now." Curley says, "Yes, you can. In fact, you've got to decide which one it is to complete the experiment." Moe says, "Look here, Puddinhead. Are you claiming that if I decide the envelope contains a sliced coin, I'll find that inside? And if I decide it's a chopped coin, I'll find that inside?" Curley, "That's right." "Listen here, that's crazy," says Moe. "That would mean that whatever's inside is not quite real." To which Curley replies, "Yuck, yuck, yuck." So Moe says, "All right, I say I'm going to find a chopped coin in there. Now, can I also decide which half of the coin I'll find, Lincoln's head or the shoulders?" Curley says, "Nope, that's the part you have to discover. Looking to see which one it is called the measurement. You get to decide which kind of coin you're going to observe, sliced or chopped. But once you've decided that, then the chance determines which half it is." And, of course, Professor Larry gets the other half of the same coin. So now it comes to the question, how in the world is it possible in this little story to send an envelope that says quantum on it and to have the person who's the recipient of that decide whether the coin that's inside is going to be sliced or chopped? That's already happened. But, in fact, in the world of quantum, the results or the actual facts of something are not determined until the measurement's made, and that's what this little story illustrates. And it's totally beyond our ordinary way of thinking, beyond the rational way we would think of things as being caused by causation, one cause after the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I think this understanding things from that point of view really gives rise to the applications of entanglement, shall we say, too. I would say because I was watching your seminar. I think it was for scientificexploration.org. I think it was,
yeah.
and how you had the question concerning, like, well, if there is a lifeless planet, and like I guess that's a hypothetical unto itself, but like how I remember the answer, concerning the entanglement, and I kind of tend to see that day to day in sort of what one might call synchronicity. Would you say that in a sense the associations like that, or just the fact that we know that there is a planet out there, is what kind of creates the observer of that rock on that unknown planet out there?
Well, that's kind of pushing things to the extreme. I mean, that's the extreme culmination of the point of view that consciousness is primary, that consciousness that just kind of creates the universe as we go along, and we think we're measuring it, but in fact we're creating it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm willing to entertain that idea kind of in principle. That sure pushes things to the edge of my threshold of credibility or credence, I should say, as a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I tend to think that the moon is there whether or not anyone looks at it.
Yeah.
But I realize that the view of conscience may be that this whole thing, this whole reality is a jointly created one. And there may be others. So it's an idea I'm willing to entertain, but I'm not willing to argue for it.
Yeah, I know, totally. I could, understand that completely, and because I'm not the scientist, I don't really have anything at stake, so I can speculate like crazy. So,
Yep.
So that's kind of what I tend to do here. I'm kind of like, figure there's a lot of people have a lot of the same kind of questions, and we're all kind of doing our own thing here on Camp Human, as I call it. One question I did have concerning the physics and how the understanding of the concept of time. I know that it's how would you describe time?
Well, it's something that passes. Seriously, I don't know how to define time other than the thing we all experience that just pushes on from past to future. Now, time does have a mathematical interpretation in the four-dimensional reality of Einsteinian physics. We talk about space as three dimensions, and the time is a fourth dimension. It's, of course, not the same as the other three. I mean, no one would mistake a second of time for an inch of measurement. They're different things. And you take care of that in mathematics by assuming that you can use an imaginary number to give the specifications on length or on time. I mean, one is a real coordinate and one is an imaginary coordinate. And mathematics works out very nicely to let you work with these things as a four-dimensional space-time. But what time actually is a question that people have wondered about since the beginning of civilization, and actually no one really knows. As far as I know, no one really knows what time is other than that we all experience it. It's the thing that separates one event from another. We know how to measure it, and we know some curious facts about how the measurement gives strange, non-intuitive results in relativity theory. But we still don't know what time is in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. Actually, I like to hear shall I say professionals take on that, just because it helps us all kind of understand that there's a lot more to understand. So leaving room for
there's one more thing I would like to comment on, though, with respect to time. That is, I'm fairly certain that space and time do not exist outside of space and time. But what I mean by that is that our universe probably came with space and time as a part of the creation process in the Big Bang. I think space and time for our universe as we know it began with the Big Bang, which then implies that there was nothing before. There was no space or time. There was no time before the Big Bang, not time as we know it. There was no space in which the Big Bang happened because there was no space at all. Now, that doesn't mean that there was nothing. It just means that there was no space and time as we know it. There may be other things, other dimensions, other realities that have parallel or what's the right word? Parallel results. I mean, parallel structure. So that something like time or something like space, or that at least that takes the place of time and space, exists in other realities. That's possible. But I don't think that space and time as we know it is different than a property of our own universe.
Mm-hmm. So I know how like a lot of cosmology and and those in that field like to look at what happened before the Big Bang. So what would that dimension or plane or measurement be of that perceived space and time that would create this space time? Does that make sense?
Well, it does, but obviously I don't know the answer to that because no one in the world knows the answer to that. But my view is that there was some kind of a cause outside of space and time, which of course seems like a contradiction because how can you have a cause without a time for that cause to operate in? If you can't separate the cause from the effect in time, then how do you even have logic at all? So I don't know. I know I'm talking paradoxically, but I think it's the best I can do because no one knows the answer to this.
Yeah.
But you have to back up to some kind of a first cause. This is something Aristotle argued over 2,000 years ago. And when physicists say, well, the universe has no actual beginning, it just resulted from no creation by any intelligence, it really just resulted from quantum fluctuations. My interpretation of that is, well, a quantum fluctuation requires a quantum law to be in existence. Without a quantum law to tell something to fluctuate, it can't even fluctuate. So the idea of having an uncaused universe is, I think, an impossible one, whether you look at it from a spiritual perspective or a scientific perspective. You still have to have a precausal something, an agent that causes things to happen. That can either be a set of laws that somehow are there primordially, who knows how they got there, or in my view, the product of an intelligence, of some intelligence that thought the whole thing into existence.
Yeah, yeah. How are you finding the reception to your theory in the community, in the physics community?
I really can't say because I don't talk about it much with people. I mean, I have a few close friends that I talk to about it, but I don't go to conferences and say, let's talk about my book, because I know a lot of people they'd probably be upset because it does, to some extent, take science to task for being dogmatic. Now science is a great thing. I mean, I've been a practicing scientist myself for decades. Yeah. There's no doubt that science works. I mean, the fact that we're talking right now on the telephone, the fact that I've got my computer open in front of me, the fact that I've got a car in my driveway, these things all attest to the success of science. Mm-hmm. And yet, there is this view that is all there is, and that whatever can't be explained in these same kind of logical rules of science cannot possibly be real. And that's where I disagree. I disagree with my colleagues on that, because I think that there is perhaps a greater realities than we are aware of within science that still remain to be explored within whatever greater realities exist, which, by the way, interestingly, string theory and M theory are indirectly pointing to. It's kind of curious that these other dimensional realities that are sort of the spiritual bailiwick wind up being part of modern physics and string theory. So it's kind of amusing almost.
Oh, yeah, and I bet especially to you how you said coming from having a spiritual foundation, and then now seeing that, like, how even from that point of view of the ancients, whatever, we all talked about like the same thing in terms of the multiple dimensions and such. And now, here are mainstream scientists who are like, it's all just causality or just whatever, are having to deal with this, and I think it's entertaining too, honestly. So yeah. I was looking at your bio and having to do with a development you did on non-zero lowest energy state, the vacuum.
Yeah.
And I was wondering your take on inertia and how, like, because I know how there's different physicists who have different theories concerning like hyperdimensional physics or energetic flow from that ether or whatever they want to call it into this one. I was wondering if you had a take on that at all.
Well, not on that in particular, because I don't think that's the case. I don't think it works that way.
Okay.
Right now, inertia is thought to result from the action of a Higgs particle. And Higgs particle has been looked for around 40 years. And the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, at the European Research Center in Geneva, is now in operation, going full blast, trying to find, as one of its primary objectives, find the Higgs particle. Well, I happen to think and happen to hope that the Higgs particle does not exist, because there is something we already know about that's part of physics that I think could do the job, and that is the quantum field, the quantum vacuum, which also goes by the name of zero-point field, and that we've discovered, a couple of colleagues and I, in papers that we've published in really respectable journals like Physical Review and Knowledge and Physique, which was the journal Einstein published in. We published papers that show that you can derive inertia from the effects of the quantum vacuum without a Higgs particle. So I'm certainly hoping that as time passes and the Higgs particle does not show up, that eventually some attention will turn to our suggestion, which, by the way, was actually a NASA-funded project. I had NASA support for this a few years ago. Turn to our approach and say, well, maybe it's the quantum vacuum that's providing inertia. And that would be very interesting, not just because it's a whole different way of looking at it, but because it just might open up the door to exotic technologies, because the quantum vacuum is an electromagnetic phenomenon. So who knows, there may be some way to influence the electrodynamics of it to perhaps control inertia someday. And that's something that Arthur C. Clarke actually got very excited about when he saw our paper. He made reference to us in his novel 3001. He actually named a space drive after us, a sharp space drive for Sakharov, Heisch, and Putov.
That's awesome. That's really cool. So that's interesting. In terms of the inertia coming from the vacuum itself, what would you call So would you just call that the 0 point then? Is that what people refer to when they say 0 point then?
Well, this raises a whole concern of mine that there's a bunch of stuff. The concept of 0 point field is out there and it's being totally misused by people who have not a clue as to what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You go online, look up 0 point field, you'll find thousands of references. And most of them are by people that simply have no idea what we're talking about because they don't have physics training. Mm-hmm. And the 0 point field has been claimed to be the basis of all sorts of things, from God himself to source of consciousness to a whole bunch of things that in many cases sound like well-meaning, new agey kind of ideas, but they have absolutely nothing to do with the physics of the 0 point field that we know to be real. And the papers that we've published deal strictly with the 0 point field as a physical phenomenon, something that results from the Heisenberg uncertainty principle as applied to the electromagnetic field. So that's a very different thing than just saying, the 0 point field is God, which makes no sense whatsoever. But that's what you find out there. And so the topic has been pretty tainted by well-meaning. Let's hope that they're well-meaning but uninformed people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that layer of where you're saying the inertia comes from, what would you call that?
It would come from the electromagnetic quantum vacuum.
Okay.
Which is a sea of light, if you want to call it that, a sea of light or photons or radio waves. In fact, it's all kinds of waves at all frequencies that pop into and out of existence just long enough to escape the prohibition of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So we know space is filled with this fluctuating sea of energy that arises because of the fluctuating nature of quantum reality. But we don't know how to do anything useful with it yet.
Interesting. Yeah, my extensive physics training goes all the way to high school physics, so I'm very much kind of like, okay, I want to understand this because I've always been intrigued by it. So it's just, and I'm really curious as to find out where science has gone now, and so this is all fascinating to me.
Yeah.
One question. Another question I did have was concerning in a lot of these circles too. We've seen the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, where they reference the different multiple possible realities that kind of happen, and within the quantum theory and some people's paradigm. So taking that into consideration with your hypothetical quantum machine with our esteemed colleagues Larry, Curly, and Mo, would you see that would you say that movie had an accurate depiction of the possible realities that kind of would fluctuate between this collective one in terms of?
Now, that's hard to say because I did see the movie and even spoke with the producer a few times, and I found that the show would be kind of a hodgepodge of things. It's not really coherent. It presents all sorts of different, sometimes contradictory perspectives on things. So I would not really endorse it as something that represents the 0 point field or inertia or any physics properly. It's some interesting ideas that were put together, but not necessarily in a way that is self-consistent and coherent.
Mm-hmm. So you would say that was more of a theory than any application of empirical evidence, shall we say?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of things that were sort of thrown together in What the Bleep, things that are worth thinking about. So I applaud the effort to provide something in the way of a film, a movie, that goes beyond the shoot 'em up, blow 'em up junk that's coming out of Hollywood. About the only thing that's coming out, not the only thing, but a lot of it which is coming out of Hollywood. So I applaud their effort, but it really was could have been greatly aided by a bit more rigor, perhaps limiting the number of topics more and being more self-consistent in the things it talked about. So I give it an A for effort, but not necessarily an A for content.
That's fair. Yeah. Actually, I was wondering too if get your thoughts on a subject that's brought up a lot too in these arenas, which has to do with torsion fields. Is there any anything you can elaborate on how those work into the possible applications of inertia and such?
No, I don't actually, because I don't really know anything about torsion fields. I mean, I've heard a few talks now and then, but I don't know enough about it to even talk coherently. So I just have to punt on that one.
That's cool. Oh, no worries on that. So I know it's a fairly weird subject anyway. So, but another thing I wanted to ask about too is one of your other projects, which is UFOskeptic.org. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I don't want to go into that too much because that's a totally separate thing from the physics discussion. So there is that site. It's called UFOskeptic.org, and it's got sort of my best thinking on what the subject is all about, what might be going on or not going on. And so I invite people to go to it, to look at it, because it's probably one of the better, more coherent summations of the scene. But really, it's my perspective on it. That's all it is. It's my view on the thing. So I don't have any smoking guns there or anything like that. But it's worth having a look at, because there's, as with zero point field itself, there's so much stuff with that three-letter word UFO that you could spend your entire life just kind of wading through rubbish. It's a very tainted subject, in part because there are lots of people that are out there that know how to make money off of it. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of dishonesty going on. And on the other hand, there may also be government efforts to provide disinformation, because the topic is one that is potentially real. So that's really about all I want to talk about with respect to that, in the program. But sure, go have a look at the website and see what I have to say, and see what I have to say.
Great. That's cool. This is definitely a good arena for those who will look at it with a discerning eye, shall we say.
Yeah.
So, just to open up the forum to you, is there anything that you would like to talk about in terms of physics, or maybe a project that you've got going on now, or anything really?
Well, it's just that the main point I'm trying to make, and I'll make here in the program, is that it's possible to have a spiritual perspective without doing any disservice to science. Mm-hmm. I think, in fact, that the three key pillars of modern science would be the Big Bang, an ancient Earth. Earth is 4.6 billion years old, not 6,000 years, but 4.6 billion years old, mm-hmm. and evolution, Darwinian evolution. I think all three of these things are not only compatible between science and religion, but they're essential. They're an essential part of the religious perspective, or the spiritual perspective, that I think is the one that would help mankind the most, and that is one that views us as incarnations of God living in a physical environment, because we are seeking that experience, because God is seeking that experience. And to do that, you actually need evolution to make the thing work, to make the whole concept work, because you want life forms to originate on planets that have conditions that are suitable for life, but you don't want some intelligence to muck around and be creating things with a cookie cutter. You want to have a process that is new and novel and lets it evolve on its own. And so, in my view, evolution is an essential part of spirituality, as is the Big Bang and an ancient Earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why we use evolution in our name here at Universal Truth Evolution, because it's the idea of growing, and I think we're definitely aligned in terms of philosophy there. That I think on a whole we need to grow into more awareness, consciousness, if you will, of this physical universe, and know that our place therein, I guess you can say.
There's a very good quote by Taylor de Chardin, the Jesuit paleontologist of the first half of the last century. He wrote, "Surely we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, but spiritual beings having a human experience." I think that really hits the nail on the head.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think that's something that most of our listeners really do live by, and so definitely have the sympathetic audience here with that. What's one way that maybe you can suggest for our audience actually to help, just maybe get more informed about some of these concepts, like what science does recognize as the 0 point field, or versus what's string theory, M theory, and how it actually applies to us. So I think that's what I hear most of the time from people when we start to talk science, is like, well, how does this really apply? Is there any good examples you can give of like how even just the quantum world applies to what we're seeing in the macro level?
Well, to get an overall perspective, I have to shamelessly say, buy my books. I mean, the two books I've written, I try to provide this scientific perspective to people in a way that can be understood. I've written in a way that's both humorous and honest, and directed towards a lay audience that is interested in things, but does not have to have any PhD. Certainly not even a major in science is required So these two books of mine, the God Theory and the Purpose Guide of the Universe, I would say it's a good place to start. As is the website. One of the websites I have called calphysics.org. That's calphysics.org. That's where there are a number of papers that can be downloaded in the zero-point field. Some of them are are ones we publish in respectable journals. Others are ones that appear in popular magazines, like The New Scientist, for example. So there's information out there, too, and that website I think is worth visiting, as is thegodtheory.com. So that's where I have the references to the two books and some other information about them and the theory behind the God Theory at thegodtheory.com. So having shamelessly promoted my own work, that's I think the place to go to look for this stuff. Of course, there are many other sources too, but and those are referenced in my book, so you can get to them as well.
Yeah, very cool. That's one of the reasons why we actually provide this platform for our guests too, so you can shamelessly promote yourself. So don't be shy on that end, because we really are trying to help people really get out more information that's beneficial for that evolution, and that really integrates all things, the science with the spiritual, to really bring everything to a cohesion here, because as we're seeing, that seems to need to happen right now.
Yeah, and it's also a fact that books that are deep have a difficult time selling. I mean, I don't think there is any such thing as a Britney Spears biography, but if there were, it would probably outsell my books by a lot. Which unfortunately tells you what people are willing to spend money for to be entertained. So there's no shortage of good information out there, but we need to get people's attention. And I think people are distracted because of the deliberate distractions that our society produces, so that we all stay good worker bees and keep the economy going. Yeah,
seriously. And I think the implications, as we kind of just touching upon, in terms of let's propose that your theory is correct, and it seems like a lot more. I've seen other scientists such as like Nassim Haramein. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, but they say the same thing, and he apparently has some math that's getting recognition through the physics societies that talks about that integration of the same thing that we're talking about here. So I think it's really cool because it's happening one way or another. But actually, on that subject, are you familiar with Nassim Haramein's work at all?
I'm not, no.
Oh, okay. Very, very interesting stuff. If you ever do get a chance to review it, I'd love your take on it. Because I'm not a physicist, and he apparently has the math too, and so I wouldn't be able to make heads or tails of the math. So, but considering if all these implications are correct, then that means that like how you're saying, that we are all little gods running around,
right,
experiencing ourselves, and so that's huge implications. And how do you think, if that's realized, how do you see that like affecting your work and what you do now?
Well, it certainly has an impact on what I think is the purpose of my life. Because if you take away any kind of an intelligence behind the universe, if you assume that it's all just the product of random statistics, they're pointless and meaningless. And if the universe is a pointless thing, then so are we probably. Mm-hmm. So what I'm proposing is a perspective that offers a major role for purpose in life. And I think that's got to help build a better society, because if we have a purpose in life and realize that purpose may extend beyond one lifetime, then we get into situations where the impact on others becomes great, where we probably have a lot of impetus towards doing better things than we do now. We thought there would be consequences that are real, both good and bad. So the purpose in life is something that I think actually would lead to a better society if it were more widely believed.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And it, like I say, that's one of the reasons why we're here doing what we're doing, is trying to bring this information forward, because it's important. It's very important. Or even just kind of how you're talking about the understanding of that that the inertial energy, shall we say, and how the implications in there. All of these things really have to come out. And are there projects that you work on that apply these principles towards anything?
Well, not a specific one right now. I mean, other than going out and talking about my book. I'm gratified to be being invited to give speeches on the book. I'm going down to Southern California in a few weeks to talk at a major symposium headed up by Deepak Chopra.
Oh.
So that's an honor. So presenting the context and the substance of my ideas that are in the books, that's taken up a lot of my time, plus the possibility of writing a third one. I'm still kind of sitting on the fence with respect to that.
Oh.
So that's these are the things that are related to the spiritual concept. I'm doing other things too, but
nice.
On the spiritual side, this is the at this point, it looks like I put my best ideas into these two books. Whether the third one has any room to grow beyond those, I'll have to wait and see.
Ah, okay. That's very cool. Go ahead and let our listeners know where they might be able to catch you in California.
Well, this is going to be a symposium in Southern California, and you can look it up by going to Scientists and Sages. That's Scientists and Sages. That'll point to the event later this month in the San Diego area with Deepak Chopra.
Oh, okay. I'm going to go ahead and post that link in the chat room right now too, so everyone can follow that and check it out, and hopefully go meet you there too. I'm sure that's going to be a great time. Very cool. Do you have any other speaking gigs lined up at all coming up?
A local one with an Noetic Sciences study group, and there'll be others, but so far I haven't scheduled too many yet so far this year.
Have you been involved in any studies concerning consciousness field or just consciousness in general? Maybe like along something like how Dean Radin does various analysis of these. Have you been involved in any of those kinds of studies as well?
I have not. I know Dean quite well. I know what he's doing, and I applaud what he's doing. It's a great thing. I have not personally been involved in research in this area, in any aspect of this area. I served as an editor of the Journal of Scientific Exploration, where in fact we published a lot of stuff on these topics, on ESP, on remote viewing, on precognition, lots of things. And so my role has been one of being a facilitator for bringing this information to the public, not as a researcher. I've never been a researcher in any of these anomalous areas, but I do know quite a few of the researchers that are in the field, and I know who the good ones are, and Dean Radin's certainly one of the good ones.
Very cool. In your observation of these phenomena, and especially from your objective perspective, what do you think would aid in sort of solidifying the evidence presented there that this phenomena exists? What do you think is needed to help really kind of communicate that?
Well, that's a really good question. Now, if people have transcendent experiences of their own, that would be very convincing, because hardly anyone who ever has a transcendent experience, which is one in which suddenly you're enveloped in a white light, typically a white light, and then you feel emotions of ecstasy, and time comes to a stop, and you kind of experience all of reality all at once, and then you're back in the real world. That seems to obviously move people when they have it. I've never had that myself. The more widespread that phenomenon would manifest itself, I think the more widespread would it be for people to believe that there's more beyond the physical universe. But beyond that, which we can't make happen, I'm trying in my books to present a perspective on a worldview that is one of compassion and one of purpose. Mm-hmm. And so I think that trying to spread the word that way is certainly a way to go, and one that I've used. Because I think that this needs to be a different perspective put out there for people to think about, instead of having the choice be one between religions which have lots of problems and which can be very dogmatic and intolerant and non-inclusive, mm-hmm. and some of the hubris you find coming out of some scientists, not all, but some scientists who claim that science has proven there is no God, which I think is total nonsense. So there's a vast middle ground that I'm trying to address in my books that is directed towards the people who are too smart to fall in with the fantasies of the preachers, but at the same time kind of worried that scientists are telling them, well, there can't be any greater purpose in life than just living. They want to find something better than that, and it's in between these two extremes, and that's the area that I'm writing to.
Very cool. And I think that perspective of how you said you haven't necessarily experienced the transcendental stuff yourself, but I think that actually does bring a valuable, grounded perspective to all of this too, which, as you said, when you look up 0 point on the internet, you find some vastly ungrounded stuff. So,
yep.
Yeah, so I know this is why I appreciate the scientific method and the data that comes out of it, because it's made to be like this, so you can reference it. It's reproducible and repeatable, and so if we got to that stage, we can build.
Yeah.
So,
well, my experience also shows that you can be just an intellectual kind of person, not an experiential one, and still find a way to come to the conclusion that there's more to reality than just the physical universe, and that probably this other reality is sort of a realm of God, and that there is that realm of God somewhere and other realities. And you can come to this conclusion from a perfectly scientific perspective. Not that science says that you have to come to it, but without doing any violence to science, without challenging science in any way, within its own territory, you can come to that conclusion. And I've shown how you can do that intellectually without the need for an experience, although, of course, I would love to have such an experience.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you and I talk here, because I was actually born with as a lucid dreamer, so I just wake up in my dreams all the damn time, and so I've had all kinds of different experiences of different natures, the ESP, telepathy, precognition, all these things. So I've kind of been experiencing this all my life, and so it's now we have, once again, what we're talking about of these two poles sort of coming together here to come to a census.
Well, let me turn the tables on you then, because I'm really curious to know how you induce that. How do you, when you're asleep, tell yourself, "Oh, this is a lucid dream"? Because I've tried this many times, and I've never succeeded at it, and I sure would love to know how to do that.
Oh yeah. So let me ask you this: do you dream regularly? Do you have good dream recall at all?
And I don't have really good recall, but I do dream a lot. Yes.
Okay. The trick is, I found, is to recognize where your symbols are coming to play into your dreams. So if you understand the symbolism in your dream, then recognize what that means to you in your day, and then recognize that is what you're going to see. Does that make sense?
Partially. Try again.
Okay.
I really would like to know.
Oh yeah. I love talking about this anyways. We have plenty of time. So what I'm talking about is, like, for instance, let's say you have just for sake of example, there's a phobia of spiders.
Okay.
And that when you see spiders in your dreams, sometimes it looks like a spider, or sometimes let's say it's a black, we'll say it's like a black spider that can come in different forms. It could be on a book, it can actually be a huge thing, but either way it induces the same feeling. So if you recognize that, then you can recognize that, say, when you see a spider in your day, you can just recognize, okay, my symbol for it is this. And see, associatively with, like, any of your phobias and triggers, they all kind of physiologically lead to the same kind of, like, subconscious trigger, of kind of some kind of like tension or, fight or flight response. So even if you can recognize your own fight or flight response and recognize that I don't like that spider, and if I saw it in a dream, while you're waking, that experience itself creates a loop, so of integrating that dream world into your regular day. So when you go to sleep and all of your experiences are reamalgamated into your subconscious symbolism in that first cycle of sleep, you have a little like, oh yeah, I'm integrating both days. And see, what it is what you're actually doing is you're engaging your conscious mind in the dream world. So you might not be able to wake up, let's say if you had the nightmare of the spider, but you might be more inclined because you're like, wait a minute, I always have nightmares of spiders and I always see this one. Wait, it's that spider. And then you have a chance to wake up like that. Now that's one method, but then there's the other one where you can kind of actually induce the dream, which has to do with building what you want to see and having intense focus. But yeah,
imagine what you want.
Yes. And at the same time, though, it you have to your subconscious or your body memory, in a lot of ways I like to call it, has to recognize what you're talking about too. So that's where all of your associations, those subconscious associations, start coming into play. And so like one of the tips I give is to before going to sleep, have in your mind what you want to see, and then start relaxing yourself to where you're falling asleep, but maybe you're not quite out yet, but you're very close to being asleep, and just kind of run that in your mind and try to stay there in that state for a while. Get used to understanding when you're in a different mind state, And so that's actually kind of an NLP thing where you're actually programming yourself and you're actually programming this intention in. And what happens is, and when this happens, this even if a dream isn't induced that night of what you're seeing, what you're doing, though, is you're in it. Once again, it works back into what I was talking about earlier about working the dream world more into your waking world. So it all kind of serves that higher intent of kind of wanting to be more conscious in the dream world to serve whatever purpose that you're intending to do.
So, for example, if I wanted to, in my dream, fly over the Grand Canyon, what I should do is, as I fall asleep, just visualize the Grand Canyon, visualize flying over it, and then in the dream state, I might lucidly actually wind up flying over it.
Yeah, and when I say imagine, build it from your senses. So, like, for instance, how is it going to feel? What is it going to smell like? All of these other things like that. What are you doing? Even use pictures, imagery before you go to sleep or something of, I want to see that spot. Because what happens is, depending on where your conscious is, because that's one thing that it makes this so difficult, is because we have so many, triggers and conscious beliefs and filters that all those come into play. So sometimes you'll have this opportunity of lucidity, which I call, where you'll see, because your intention is to wake up in your dream and fly over the Grand Canyon, you might have an actual replay of that, seeing the Grand Canyon on your computer screen, and you might not recognize it when you wake up, but you might not recognize it when you're in the dream, but you might recognize when you wake up. You're like, oh, I was seeing that again, and that means you're very close to inducing your own, full-on lucid encounter, because you recognize that you induced the conscious recollection of that Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
And so,
thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. And so that's why the whole concept of how the quantum mechanics factors into this reality just intrigues the hell out of me, because of what I've seen in my own experiences with precognition, and actually, honestly, bilocality. So that's why I was really just like, about all this. Because being awake in that realm of perception, I've sort of seen that quantum haze of like choice before it's made, and then seeing one of those choices manifest, even though I knew it was there. So that's kind of why I asked about what the bleep question too, because like in a sense it can almost look like that in the dream realm. So, but yeah, so I mean, in a sense, like in terms of the quantum observer effect, and then how we're saying if we're spirits having a human, we're spirits having a human experience here. I know this is purely speculative, of course, but it's like where would you say that observer lies in us, or where, like in terms of this physical reality to manifest, this computer the computers we're talking through, all this other such. Would you say that is the individual, or would you say that's a collective consciousness?
Well, the individual makes the experiment, does the measurement. So I think our individual consciousness is a sort of stepped down, tuned down, constrained version of a consciousness that we actually have as our essential selves. I think our essential nature is consciousness, nothing but consciousness. Disembodied consciousness is, I think, our true nature, because I think that's the offshoot of God that we are. But then this little spark of a immortal spiritual being, you and me, choose to enter physical reality and enter physical bodies to have this experience. So that tells us that the point of being here is one that is consistent with an experience that I think God itself seeks through us, and that can only be had by sort of entering into a world, in the case of our universe, or worlds if there's more than one universe, if there are other universes, which I suspect there may well be, experiencing all the possibilities, all the tremendous possibilities of creative existence that otherwise would remain a pure, sterile nothing, even within the realm of God. That there would be nothing to replace the experience that he, she, it is getting through living beings in our universe and perhaps others.
Yeah, I can totally agree with that, and very, very interesting. So, what do you find is the biggest resistance when you make these talks to those who come from a very, reductionist point of view?
That's hard to say because I haven't had too many scientists in my audience. I don't direct it to the scientific community. When I give talks, it's usually to people that are interested in these things. People like, for example, last night I went to a meeting of the Noetic Sciences Study Group up in on the San Francisco Peninsula. So I give talks there. I don't give talks on this subject anyway at scientific conferences, so I can't really say what my colleagues how they would respond. I would guess that probably the majority of them would say, "Oh, that's nonsense because that's not scientific." I know better because I know what scientific is. I've done it for many years. I've published lots of papers. I've even been an editor of a major journal, one of the scientific editors of a major journal. So I know what good research qualities are. So I would disagree with the idea that anything having to do with this is incompatible with being a scientist. But that's the kind of reaction I would expect to get. Although, there was a study done not too long ago that showed that about 40% of scientists believe in some kind of a God. And that was surprising to me to see the figure that high. And that figure is a lot lower than the population at large, which is about 80 or 90% in the U.S. But still, 40% is fairly respectable. And the fact that even with 40%, you don't find spiritual topics coming up at conferences, not that I've ever known, scientific conferences, I mean, that's a pretty good indication that there's kind of a taboo on the topic if you want to be a real scientist, at least with respect to your public persona.
Yeah, that's. I think that in itself is interesting because, I think it's no coincidence to me that some of the more hardcore reductionist, kind of materialist scientists would be afraid of the concept of like, even Einstein talked about action at a distance and all these other things because of the implications and such. So, but yeah, that's interesting because I know, like, just in my day-to-day now, like at one point it seemed like there was so much resistance to the integration of the spiritual side of things as well as the Darwinian model that would include the evolution, and it seems like now that's happening more and more. Have you noticed a shift or any kind of more reception to what you're saying over the time that's going on?
I think there's been a big shift happening in the world outside of science. I mean, among the population at large, there's been a big shift. Now, that big shift also comes with some warning signs because it's certainly in our Western societies that shift is I think, pretty much a healthy one. I see it basically healthy. But then as you look at the aberrations in the Islamic world, where you have the fundamentalist nutcases that interpret God as being some kind of a warlord that needs to be pacified and blood spilled for him and that sort of thing. That kind of transformation is certainly a dangerous one and an irrational one. And so it's not totally a values-free thing. It's or not totally a positive values thing, even though mainly in the Western societies it is. So do I see something changing? I think so. People that spend more time than I do in the world of the experiential, I think they see it more than I do. They claim yes, but without a doubt, we're on a path now that's changing mankind's mental perspective on things. I hope that's true. But as I said, even if that is true, there is also possibly an unwanted dark side from our perspective that we have to be aware of.
Yeah, definitely. There's always that unknown, as we could say. So, yeah, we're actually at the top of the hour right now, so we should go ahead and take a break, let everyone stretch the legs, grab something to drink, come back here. Be about a 4.5 minute or so song here. So by all means, get comfy. And all right, everyone, thanks for hanging out here. We're gonna go ahead and, like I said, take a break. So do your thing. See you back here in a little bit. We'll keep talking about our physical reality here in interesting ways. So. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us here in our second hour of Universal Truth Evolution on blogtalkradio.com. That was a little ditty by Alok Dutta, Tabla Master. Very spiritual guy in himself, actually as a teacher of mine too, and really helped spiritually align me, shall I say, when I was probably really just not with it. So for that, I'm always eternally grateful to Alok. And if you dig on that song, head on over to his website there, alokdutta.com, and you can pick up that little tune, which is Boat of Ice. So we're here having a spiritually physical discussion, shall we say, with Dr. Heisch. concerning physics and consciousness. So welcome back, Doctor.
Well, glad to be here again.
Yeah, awesome. It's such an interesting topic here, considering all the one, like we were talking about, the implications of where science is headed, where everyone is kind of our consciousness on the whole is really focusing on, and I was wondering a little bit of how because we hear this term used a lot too, kind of like one of those that can be misconstrued or used different ways, but frequency. How does frequency relate to essentially reality on the quantum level?
Well, I guess I don't see any relationship. Frequency is something that's very badly misused by people. It's a very simple thing. It's simply the amount of time something passes a certain point. If you have a light beam moving along, then the light has a certain frequency, which means, for example, you pass a counter, it would have 30 billion hits per second. So a frequency is simply a property of a wave that shows you the wave moving, and the distance between the wavelengths determines, plus the speed determines how quickly the frequency happens. So it's kind of a misused term in the New Age realm. It just means a level of vibration. Any connection between that level of vibration and our any kind of spiritual perspective.
Interesting. I think that's a different take, which I like. I appreciate. So, considering what we think of things like what's an atom or what's a photon, and then we start relating. Well, what is that? I mean, maybe you can actually answer that for us. What is a photon?
Well, a photon is a bundle of light. It's kind of interesting because a photon is the other half of the light coin, so to speak. Light behaves just like a wave in most circumstances. That's why you can diffract it and get a two-slit interference pattern or a one-slit pattern. It's because you can easily show how wavelengths of light, when they encounter certain obstacles, how they interact with each other. That's true. Light is a wave. On the other hand, if you have a beam of light, all waves, and you turn down the power on it, so like taking a faucet, have a running faucet of water, and you turn down the faucet, pretty soon you're going to get to the point where individual drops of water come out instead of a stream, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the same thing for photons, for light. Light behaves like a wave when it's pretty intense. But if you turn down the light level more and more and more, pretty soon you'll start to see individual bundles of light, and those are called photons. And they behave like particles instead of like waves. So how does something that is basically, or I would say how does something that basically looks like a particle behave like a wave when it's in bigger multitudes? And the answer is nobody knows. Nobody knows how this can have both properties, but it does.
Interesting. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That kind of basic understanding, if you will, is thoroughly needed, I think. Because, I think it really goes to show how there's so much more wonder to the universe, shall we say, than a lot of people realize. On both ends of the spectrum, the metaphysical and the scientific, who think that everything's finite. Which I thought that was interesting. The perspective you shared on that YouTube video concerning how you feel that the universe isn't finite. Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, we don't really know what shape the universe has for sure, but it looks ever more like it's kind of a flat universe that's not only expanding but it's accelerating. This is an interesting discovery over the last less than 20 years, that the universe is accelerating. Now, we've known for a long time, since the early to mid-1920s, that the universe is expanding. Edwin Hubble discovered that. And the expansion of the universe was then taken as a basis for trying to determine what the geometry of the universe is. Is the universe really like a flat space-time that's expanding into nothingness? Is it a curved space-time? If so, is it a curve that curves in on itself? Like, for example, the surface of the Earth. And the surface of the Earth is a two-dimensional example of something that curves in on itself. You can walk around from starting wherever you want. You can walk around a great circle and you wind up back where you started from. So there's no end. There's no end to the surface of the Earth if you stay within the surface itself. You can apply that same logic to the universe, except with one higher dimension. So you can ask, is the universe curved in on itself in some higher dimensional space? Possibly. Does the universe curve out on itself in some higher dimensional space? Possibly. So at this point, we really don't know for sure which it's going to do, but there's a whole new level of complication introduced by the discovery that there's such a thing as dark energy that's accelerating the universe, not just causing it to expand or letting it pull itself back together because of the force of self-gravity, but it's causing it to expand even faster. Big mystery, and it's a good mystery for science. It's one that will keep people busy for a long time.
Yeah, and I think that's all that any of us really want, right? Something to delve into and look into.
That's right. Yeah, you want something, a good problem to work on.
Yeah, that's cool. What is your take on dark energy or dark matter?
Well, it's very sobering because if you put together dark energy and dark matter, you get about 95% of the stuff of the universe, which is telling us that 95% of the universe consists of stuff that we don't see, and we can't directly experience. They're two very different things. Dark energy and dark matter are very different. One is gravitational, and one is anti-gravitational. That's not usually the way it's said, but that's how it is. In the case of dark matter, it provides extra gravitational attraction, which we think is necessary to maintain the orbits of stars and galaxies in just the right way, or the relative motions of galaxies with respect to each other in clusters. You need to have something there that kind of is a binding agent, something that provides more gravitational oomph than the stars themselves. Otherwise, it wouldn't work out. The galaxies in a cluster would fly apart. They wouldn't stay clustered. So you need dark matter as a force of positive gravity. On the other hand, dark energy is a force of negative gravity. It's forcing the universe to expand faster and faster. So we have dark energy, dark matter, which have opposite effects, and taken together constitute 95% of the universe, and we don't know what they are. Well, that's a bit disturbing.
Yeah, it is kind of intriguing in the very least to think. Yeah, and I think once again it kind of the implications of kind of like I think we're all kind of saying that there's a lot we just don't know.
Yeah, an awful lot. Yeah, in fact, the more we think we know, the more we're going to wind up in the future probably realizing, we knew even less than we thought. Because I don't believe for a second that we're anywhere near the limits of physics in terms of our understanding of it. Just because we're living in the 21st century, I don't see it at all. I think we probably won't even recognize science the way it will be conducted 1,000 years from now. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just a lot of human hubris to assume that we're close to some final answer to everything or some final discovery of all the laws of nature. Yeah,
absolutely. Especially in light of this whole dark matter, dark energy issue, it's once again kind of leaves room for some wonder and some fun tinkering. So. Yeah. So that in terms of the calculations needed for some of these clusters to fly apart, or where they theoretically would if it wasn't for this force. I know it's not necessarily the same thing, but I remember seeing also you're referring to statistics and of this sort of nature, though, of balance of this system and what it takes to actually facilitate what we see here now, being in some kind of cohesion that doesn't seem random. Could you maybe speak a little bit to that?
I'm not sure I understand the question well enough.
Okay.
Could you rephrase that?
Yeah, I remember talking about the statistical probability of conditions on I forgot what it was now. It had to do with how the conditions on this planet to be set up and what it takes to have basically something sustainable is what we're seeing now in terms of what would perpetuate life here.
Okay, I think I know where you're headed, and I can talk about that because
I
think what you're talking about are is the discovery that the laws of nature are pretty much just right to have life evolve on planets.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, we're discovering more and more planets. Just the other day in the San Francisco Chronicle, there was an article about discovery of a new solar system around another star that had a number of planets. And these planets are getting more and more Earth-like in the sense of at least their mass and their distance from the sun, or their suns, not our sun, their suns, and so on. And so we're finding that the more and more evidence that the universe is sort of similar to our local region, that there are star systems that are the analog of our solar system, and there are planets. There are now hundreds of planets discovered. In fact, the Kepler mission will probably discover over 1,000 of them. So there's lots of opportunity for life to arise on these planets. But what you're talking about, I think, is the fact that there are at least 10 critical properties of the universe that, for all we know, could have been very different than they are. And if they were much different, we wouldn't have life as we know it. We wouldn't have life at all.
Yeah.
And this discovery of the properties of the universe, that's pretty recent stuff. It's not terribly recent, like 10 or 20 years, but it's fairly recent. And we have to come up with an explanation for that. And, of course, this is where my views and those of the mainstream, most mainstream, would diverge, because I would interpret this as being evidence that there is an intelligence behind the universe, whereas the opposite conclusion is drawn by many scientists, that if our universe has fine-tuned properties, it implies that there have got to be other universes that are different than ours, so that you can explain ours away, explain ours as being simply, well, we're just one of many, and of course we're here because we couldn't exist in any other one, so what's the mystery? So these are the two perspectives that are taken on this fundamental discovery that the universe is pretty finely tuned.
Yeah. Yeah, I always find that kind of analysis very intriguing too, and I mean I can appreciate both perspectives, of course, but it's kind of like ultimately, there has to be a realization of an awareness of it all, anyways, right? So, which kind of gets into the whole what we're talking about in terms of a consciousness being there, so to speak, or being of a consciousness, shall we say?
Well, the problem arises when, instead of saying, as I think a scientist should, well, one explanation of this may be that there are many other universes. Fine, dandy, I agree with that 100%. It's when scientists, some of them do, say, this proves there must be other universes different than ours, because otherwise we're special and we can't have that. That is not science. That's dogmatism. And that's the kind of stuff that I, in my books, try to argue against, because I think it's not being truly scientific at all. And I think that science needs to be honest with respect to its view of the spiritual world, and not come up with straw men to knock down or other obstacles that really, on examination, fall apart or show evidence of being nothing more than simply dogmatism and hubris.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean, because I think we see that day to day, not only in the scientific community, but especially here in the media, of people just kind of using their interpretation of data to reinforce their paradigm, and yeah, that's true. And I know for myself, I try to be very specific when I'm like, this is what I think, can't back it up, so probably I might be wrong, probably am, but this is what I'm thinking. Then here is what is agreed upon by the collective we're sharing right now on Earth.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think that it's important that people do keep an objective perspective and realize that you can have your beliefs, but then recognize when there is there's more than just you here. So yeah, so absolutely. I was just wondering if because I know I enjoyed the your example of the quantum machine. Is there anything else maybe from your books, either of your books, that you thought you can maybe tease us with here that you think our audience would appreciate?
Well, yeah, let's see here. There's hang on a second here.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Just sorting through my notes. Let me talk about the twins entanglement experiment. This is a very simple, again, just a metaphor, not a real physics experiment, because it talks about Joe and Jim and not atoms. But let's do a twins entanglement kind of discussion. So let's pretend I'm a teacher and I have twins in my class, Joe and Jim. Well, Joe and Jim live on opposite sides of town, and they don't see each other or even talk to each other before they meet in the classroom in the morning. Okay, so they're in my classroom, but they don't see each other before they both wind up there, coming from different parts of town. Now, I've got 4 index cards in my office that say shirt, shoes, socks, or pants. Okay, I use these things with the twins experiment. Before the twins arrive, I choose one card at random. Say I choose the card socks. Now, when the twins arrive in class, I look at them, and sure enough, they're wearing the same color socks. The shirts, the shoes, the pants, they can be different, but the socks are the same. Wow. Well, all right. Next day, I do the same thing, and Joe and Jim come into class from opposite sides of town, haven't talked to each other, and this time I've gone to my random set of cards, and I pick one that says shirt. And sure enough, when they come in, they'll have the same color shirt on. So I'm determining the characteristic of them that's going to be the same, and yet they don't even know it. They don't know that what they have to do to be the same, and yet it's guaranteed to happen because of quantum laws. Now, of course, you can't really do this with Joe and Jim on the macro level. It doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. But if Joe and Jim were atoms or electrons or photons, you could do things just like this. And in fact, you would be making the experiment be the one that is the result of the measurement, and you're the one who's causing it to basically come out one way or another. Interesting.
So in terms of actual experiments, so that it's being both these different atoms are being determined, or at least photons are being determined what they are beforehand. Basically, that's kind of what's happening.
Well, what's happening is that you do something to them, you entangle them, but you don't tell them until after they've been entangled which characteristic you're going to measure. But by that time, they've already flown apart. So if you have a photon A and a photon B, and you do something to entangle their creation, and then you make a measurement of photon A, and you know that B's got to have the opposite result, but you don't tell A what part you're going to measure until they've flown apart, then how do you influence B to come up with the right complementary answer? It's a mystery, but it happens. And so two entangled photons go their opposite ways. You determine a specific kind of measurement you're going to make on the first one, but it's not known to the first one while it's still entangled with the other one. You just make that decision on the fly after they've already gone their separate ways. And sure enough, photon number 1 is going to give you a certain result, and photon number 2 will give you the opposite result that it has to, even though it doesn't know what's going on. It can't know what's going on because it's already separated from the other one by vast distances. And these experiments have been done. They're really not just thought experiments anymore. They've actually been done. And they come out with this strange way of correlating the behavior of the two objects that are no longer in contact.
Yeah, that's very intriguing, considering how, in most reductionist view, it's like, that's impossible.
There's some interesting quotes. There's a book I really love called Quantum Enigma. It's by a couple of UC, University of California, Santa Cruz professors of physics. It's about a course they've taught for many years to undergraduates in the philosophy of quantum mechanics. Not the mechanics of quantum mechanics, not the mathematics, but the philosophy. Uh-huh. And they claim that they are very successful with this because to understand some of the quantum problems, you don't have to be able to solve quantum problems in terms of an equation. Rather, the physics of quantum mechanics is purely understandable without any mathematics at all. You don't need any mathematics at all to understand the philosophy of quantum mechanics. And they point out that there's some very, very weird conclusions you can draw. For example, these are quotes from their book. There are intriguing hints of a connection of the world we call physical with that which we call mental. Okay, another quote. Theory seems to tell us that the reality of the physical world depends on our observation of it. Another one. Accordingly, before a look collapses a widely spread out wave function to the particular place where the atom is found, the atom did not exist there prior to the look. So they're saying that if you make a measurement on say, which box an atom is in, the atom is not really in either box if you have two boxes before you look at it. Before you look at it, it's not an atom at all. It's really part of a wave function. That wave function is sort of a fuzzy thing that can actually be in two places at once. And yet when you make a measurement, voila, you're going to force a wave function to collapse and then have the atom appear in a box. But that doesn't happen until you make the measurement. So you're forcing the measurement to actually create reality. And then lastly, but the atoms are elementary particles are not real. They form a world of potentialities or possibilities rather than one of things or facts. And that was Heisenberg that said that. He's talking about the non-reality. This is Heisenberg. We're talking about the non-reality of elementary particles. Mm-hmm. Pretty challenging stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so fun. I love it because I think that for those who maybe aren't familiar with how scientific phrasing, it's like he's kind of saying there's a other world in a sense. Those are huge reaching implications, and like I said, I totally understand why that scares the hell out of some people.
Well, in fact, these two physicists have been told by their colleagues, look, you better keep the skeleton in the closet. What are you doing? You're presenting these ideas to undergraduates. They're going to doubt physics because this stuff is paradoxical. So why are you handing these students a smoking gun? These are the two terms that were used. You're handing students a smoking gun. You should be hiding the skeleton in the closet. And so this kind of shows you what level of emotion is evoked by some of the conundra of quantum mechanics.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's one thing. It seems that it's inherent within this system is sort of like a paradoxical nature of some sort. And
Let me give you one more quote. This is a very different one because this comes from a scientist who lived in the first half of the last century, Sir James Jeans, very brilliant guy who worked in astrophysics. In fact, one of the premier astrophysicists of the last century. And he wrote in one of his books, quote, "The universe begins to look more like a great thought than like a great machine. Mind no longer appears as an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We're beginning to suspect that we ought rather to hail it, that is mind, as the creator and governor of the realm of matter." So he was one who came out and actually said that the universe, to him, appeared more like a thought, and that everything in it was a thought. And I agree with that. I think that probably the most rational explanation I can think of for our universe is that it's a thought of a great intelligence, that thought is into existence, sort of in the way that we would create a virtual reality on a computer. We're now sort of creating our own little mini realities on our computers and on our calculational systems. But maybe all of reality is simply sort of a vast, beyond comprehension kind of matrix game that the great intelligence behind it all is cobbled up to gain experience, to evolve itself through us.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's interesting because another video that I caught on YouTube was with, I believe it was with yourself and Thomas Campbell, talking a little bit about how I said that the tongue-in-cheek, kind of, I forgot what he called it, but that, that we're all, it's like a cell within another being or something, and it kind of gives rise to those implications, which I think just makes, once again, this universe much more fun to think about in a lot of ways.
Yeah. It opens up the possibilities that there are other intelligences elsewhere, not necessarily in our universe, maybe in our universe, but in parallel universes, other universes that may exist dimensionally.
Mm-hmm.
All sorts of possibilities are opened up, not just by this kind of thinking on the spiritual side, but by the string theory side, the M theory side, where the existence of other dimensions is taken as essential. You can't do the mathematics without modeling other dimensions. And those other dimensions, why would they not contain universes? They probably would. And maybe inches from our nose in some other direction. So there could be, so to speak, aliens right here, just separated from us by the smallest distance in a new dimensional space.
Yeah, that's and it's interesting you say that because that's what a lot of people even on this show have espoused, but just from an experiential point of view. So I think that is very intriguing. So and I know you've appeared on Coast to Coast too. So these realms are obviously crossing, in that sense. So that's why I do hope that you're able to have some success with the little dream tips I gave you there, because it's I find that these that we do experience these dreams, and I'm sure how many great scientists have experienced their breakthroughs via the dream state. So
yes, I've heard that.
Yeah, so I'm sure that's waiting there for you when the time's right. So it'll be cool.
Good. Can't wait.
Yeah, and so this is all very, very intriguing. Just so anyone who just joined us or just why not, go ahead and let people know where they can get your book.
It's just go to www.thegodtheory.com or just type in thegodtheory.com. That takes you to the website, and there's a link to Amazon where you can just click on the link and go straight to Amazon and get the book if you want. It's also available in some of the bookstores like Barnes and Noble, but Amazon certainly carries it. And going to the website, thegodtheory.com, will get you there.
Very cool, very cool. And then I know you have an upcoming speaking engagement too, correct?
That's correct. At the Sages and Scientists Conference in Costa Mesa in Southern California, being put on by the Deepak Chopra Foundation.
Very cool, very cool. And how have you enjoyed working with that group so far?
Well, this will be my first time with them, actually. It'll be fun. It's kind of, I'm a little bit apprehensive because one of the other speakers there is also a scientist, is the gentleman who co-authored the book recently with Stephen Hawking, Leonard Mlodinow. He wrote The Grand Design, which has been on the #1 bestseller list in the U.S. for the last several months, as a collaborator of Hawking, and he'll also be at the conference. So I've got to stay on my toes to make sure I don't say anything physically that he could challenge, because he's a pretty smart guy.
It's interesting that should be interesting. So everyone listening, hey, go check it out. You're gonna have two very keen physics minds with data going out here. So.
Let's hope that's the outcome of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I'm sure you'll do just fine. I mean, with someone who's been on as many NASA panels as heat-resistant tiles, I would say you're probably. So I think you'll be just fine. So, but yeah, that should be cool. What are you finding that it seems that most people are disagreeing on right now in terms of like coming to a unified field theory, if you will?
Well, it's hard to say because the view I get on things is probably pretty heavily filtered. When I go and give a talk on my books, I don't wind up, with a born again Baptist audience. I don't wind up with a Nobel laureate audience of scientists either.
Yeah.
So my perspective on things is kind of biased by who comes to listen, and the people come to listen, form an interesting set of people. It's pretty broad, but still there's a basic interest in new ideas, sometimes an over-interest in new ideas. It can become dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Open minds, willingness to listen. There are also a lot of preconceived notions that are all wrong. So I don't think I'm sure I don't see a typical audience when I give a talk, so it's hard for me to say how things are working out in general in society at large. I do think that I would agree with people who have said 10 years ago or more that the world is beginning to open up and offer explanations of things that would at this time challenge science, but in the end prove to be true. I think that's the case. That's beginning to happen. But my view is not that universal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's well, that's cool because here we're we have an alternate perspective on a lot of the mainstream goings on too. But just as yourself, we aim to be as discerning as possible, and yeah, we recognize that within almost any society you have a dogma, including the scientific community, which can be very dogmatic. So totally understand like that sort of push pull going on there, and how I can imagine that that doesn't you don't find yourself in certain circles as much. So
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, there was I want to point out that good old Carl Sagan actually had some good things to say about some of these things that we've been talking about. I'm trying to find a quote of his by rummaging around in my desk here. I know exactly what I'm looking for, but don't want to misquote Carl. So let me just rummage a little bit further here.
Yeah, no worries.
There we go. It's out of his book, The Demon-Haunted World. I'm going to quote from The Demon-Haunted World by Carl Sagan. At the time of writing, there are three claims in the ESP field which, in my opinion, deserve serious study. Number one, that by thought alone, humans can, parenthesis, barely, affect random number generators in computers. Number two, that people under mild sensory deprivation can receive thoughts or images, quote, projected at them. And three, and this is an important one, that young children sometimes report the details of a previous life, which upon checking turn out to be accurate, which they could not have known about in any way other than reincarnation. I pick these claims not because I think they're likely to be valid, he says I don't, but examples of contentions that might be true. And I got to applaud Carl for saying that, because I'm sure he picked up a lot of flack for this. Mm-hmm. And I don't mind if he says he didn't find any evidence for it, but he's certainly on the right track, was on the right track, and being open-minded enough to say that there's plenty of evidence in these areas that's worthy of scientific consideration. And I think science is failing its obligations by excluding these topics from scientific investigation. The fact that you can't apply for a grant from the National Science Foundation or National Institutes of Health for studies in this area, or NASA, that's unfortunate, because I think that as in these areas that we're going to find a whole new realm that is open to human beings, a whole new way of seeing things that probably will come along with, I hope, expanded powers of our consciousness, although I have to worry about how that would actually work itself out with respect to the different wants and needs of different human beings. But I applaud Carl for coming out and saying that these things ought to be studied. I agree 100% that they ought to be studied.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said earlier, like how, I'm not an accredited scientist, so I can speculate away. And so I like the fact that, like you said, that the very grounded perspective of saying that, yes, this has to be looked at. And that's ultimately what I say to people when I say, yeah, I'm not necessarily, I can't work out the math on this certain stuff. So I'm just saying someone who can should. You know what I mean? So because of all this same thing, it's like I think that that these things need a serious, discerning look in the broader scale, and like how we referenced your friend Dean Radin earlier, and how he with his meta-analysis and his excellent video that I highly recommend for everyone is the Taboo of Psi for the Google Tech Talk, where he demonstrated the statistical reality, and I
think Dean's got hard data. He's got hard data that shows somehow the mind is aware of things within the context of his experiment. The mind is aware of things 10 or 15 seconds before it happens. I think he's got evidence that's really solid statistically that shows this, and that's of course quite a challenge. It certainly contradicts anything that is considered feasible within mainstream science. We don't allow for precognition like that, but he's got serious evidence that it actually can be done, and I think that's amazing, and I think that science needs to acknowledge that, and would probably discover that there are really interesting consequences of this that are at least as interesting as discovering the dark energy or the top quark or some of the other recent discoveries in physics.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, and I totally agree with you that I can see how a study into any one of these subjects could, inadvertently give insight into some of the other questions that people had, even at CERN, things like that.
Yeah.
So, and that's interesting. So what is your take on CERN, actually, since we brought it up there?
Well, I don't have any great take on it, just that I'm waiting for them to decide that, well, maybe we're not going to find the Higgs particle after all. But, of course, that's a hard thing to wait for, because you can always go one step further, turn up the gain a little bit more and hope we don't blow out the machine, and let's try one more time. So there's never going to come, well, there will eventually come a time when people walk away from it if the Higgs does not exist. But it could be a number of years, because there's a lot of emotional, psychological, and professional need to have the Higgs be discovered. If not, it throws a big monkey wrench into things. So my hope for CERN is that it's never found, because I think it's a more interesting explanation in our quantum vacuum field interpretation. So that's about as far as my involvement with CERN goes. It's just a spectator hoping that they do not find something. I hope they find lots of other neat things, sure, but I hope they don't find the Higgs. That would be nice if they didn't.
Yeah, I'm actually right there with you. So I'm waving that banner too with you, going, don't find anything. So, but yeah. So that's cool because I find it interesting too is that it seems like more of the physicists such as yourself who are more open about what they're doing and kind of come out that they're all saying yeah, you're not going to find a particle, but the ones who are very oh no, we know what we're talking about. We have this thing down to clockwork. Watch. They're the ones that seem so adherent to this theory. It's well, at least you guys get to smash something.
Well, I guess I need to distance myself a little bit from that because I'm not really a physicist. I'm an astrophysicist. It's similar, but it's not the same thing. And I think, on the astrophysics side, I think we're a little bit more open than on the physics side. And partially that may be due because as astrophysicists, we're used to dealing with things in the universe, things in the cosmos. There are some very bizarre things in the cosmos. And so with that being our stomping ground, so to speak, I think we're more open as astrophysicists to new ideas than are the physicists who look at the physics theories. That's my take on it, but that's a minor distinction to draw.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm glad you made that distinction too, because there obviously is a huge difference. I mean, even in my high school physics, I recognize that I actually did enjoy the stuff in space more than I did counting 1, 2, 3, 27 meters. You know what I mean? So I always thought that was intriguing because of those facts that there was things that were just kind of odd. So. Is actually what made you get into the field you did?
In the field of astrophysics?
Yeah.
Well, this goes way back to when I was a kid. It goes way back to my earliest childhood when I was growing up, and I knew that there were two things I wanted to do. Maybe in the first grade, I think I knew that there were two things I wanted to do. One was to become a priest, and one was to become an astronomer. And so I followed both these things while I was in grade school and high school. I went to a high school It was a prep school for the seminary. It was called the Latin School of Indianapolis, and went actually into not into a monastery, but into a seminary that was run by a monastery, that was run by the Benedictine monks at St. Meinrad Abbey in southern Indiana. So I spent a whole year, my freshman year of college, going to school there, studying for the priesthood. But I knew pretty much right away that I wasn't going to go beyond that first year. I was going to drop out and go into a secular career, go up to Indiana University and pursue my bachelor's degree up there. But I did spend that year in the seminary, and so I realized that I wasn't going to do both these things, but let me do one thing anyway, and that was to become an astronomer, which I did. But in fact, it's possible to be both. If you wanted to, you could become a priest and an astronomer. There are some really good scientists that are priests and they're bona fide astronomers, and mainly Jesuits. And in fact, the Vatican Observatory has a very modern facility in, of all places, Arizona. They run a very high-quality observatory right adjacent to Kitt Peak. And so the Vatican Observatory's got one of the world's most, a world-class observatory in Arizona, surprisingly. So it's possible to do that, but I didn't want to. I mean, there are a few obstacles to doing that, such as, for example, not having any women in your life. Well, that's a drawback.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, put it in the vernacular.
Yeah, I hear you on that one for sure. But yeah, it is intriguing. A lot of people don't realize that the Vatican does have quite an extensive astronomical program. So I know they even get satellite feeds and such from the sun. So
now, unfortunately, they're a little bit laggard in some areas. For example, when Galileo was finally acquitted of heresy, I believe that happened in 1992.
Oh, wow.
Let that sink in.
Yeah. So, very, very interesting. All right. Well, wow. We're all, time's going by so quickly here. We're almost. Yeah, it really is. So, very, very cool though. All of these, that awareness itself of consciousness being, so important in terms of even science. It's really cool that we have more, accredited scientists like yourself speaking about this. Just because we, obviously we don't tend to hear this on, TV. So it's really good. And I think how we were saying before, like some of the dogmas in general, I think that's probably what may be inhibiting some of the science that can go into this that could be publicly funded, because I think it seems to me that politically, everyone kind of, they want to distance themselves like crazy from the subject. But as we're seeing,
it's all a matter of money, because there's not enough money to go around. There never is. I mean, there's never enough money to go around to do all the science we would like to do, all the science that can be thought of by all the brilliant physicists and chemists and astronomers that are around. There's never enough money, and so there's always the same argument always, which is don't spend money on things that are nutty. Don't spend money on things that are not liable to work. We've got plenty of good, solid programs. And, that's true, but, of course, if you never look somewhere, you're never going to find something. So that's kind of a sad argument to sort of always keep this other stuff at bay just because it's too controversial for the mainstream. And, hope there'll come a time when it just is unavoidable that looking into some of these topics will be absolutely necessary because we know they're real. We can't just ignore them anymore. Absolutely.
And hopefully you'll be in on some of those studies, right?
Well, let's hope so, yeah. Let's hope so.
Yeah, that would be awesome. But yeah, because it's true. There's so many, especially because how we're talking about how that micro and macro perception really comes into play. I mean, considering how you're saying your astrophysics now, and how in a lot of ways it correlates to that micro world, and so we're seeing that once again, that kind of collision, if you will. So how did you kind of make that jump yourself from kind of going from the big massive bodies to the smallest of small?
Well, I guess it was because of the work that a good colleague and friend of mine, Hal Puthoff, had done in the 1980s, publishing some work on the zero-point field. That intrigued me. And, I certainly have had some training in quantum physics. It comes as part and parcel of becoming an astrophysicist. You have a pretty good grounding in physics, plus the astronomy side, but a pretty good grounding in physics. So I knew about the quantum vacuum Or at least I knew the quantum mechanics even as an astrophysicist. And so when I discovered that Hal was working on this in the late 1980s, it finally was brought to my attention that there were some perhaps really intriguing connections. Originally, he was thinking, or at least I was thinking, of a possible connection with cold fusion. That didn't pan out, as the cold fusion itself not pan out, even though I think, even now, I think there's something to it, and I think it'll eventually resurface. But at the time in 1989, it was kind of self-destructed due to some, unfortunate tactics, certain leaders in the science field that I think was not totally ethical. But anyway, the problem was that the field did come and go rather quickly. And it got me thinking about the zero-point field as a possible source of energy for that phenomenon. That's really what intrigued me at the time. And I did a little bit of thinking about that and wrote a little paper on it, but never got it published. And I've kind of abandoned that way of looking at things. But that's what brought the topic back to my attention.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because like I said, that's an interesting sort of jump in perspectives of physics. Going from the vastly huge to the infinitely small. So,
right.
Yeah.
Now remember that the key aspect of astrophysics is spectroscopy. That's where you get most of your information, is spectroscopy. And spectroscopy is, of course, based upon the atomic physics that governs atoms. And so we have to pretty well know the rules of quantum physics to make an astrophysical interpretations. And so there is that connection.
Yeah. Absolutely. Actually, can you maybe elaborate on what I'm sorry, what was it again?
Spectroscopy.
Yeah.
Well, how do you know, for example, what the sun consists of? Well, we know it's made of hydrogen and helium plus some other elements. How do we know that? We've never been there. We couldn't land on the sun with a spacecraft. It would burn up right away. Mm-hmm. Well, we measure spectral lines. We look at the spectrum of the sun, and if we see, imagine the spectrum of the sun projected by a prism. You know what that looks like. It's a rainbow-colored spectrum. Mm-hmm. It is the real rainbow. But if you look carefully, you'll see that there are certain dark areas in that spectrum. And that dark area indicates that there's absorption of a certain part of the spectrum by an atom. In one case by hydrogen atoms, in other cases by helium atoms. And it's that detection of the signature in the spectrum of other elements, whose signatures have all now been characterized, that led us to astrophysics to tell us, this star has too much carbon in it, this star has too much oxygen in it. Or we look at gas clouds and we can determine what they're made out of, or even determine what molecules they're made out of. So the ability to look at spectral lines in all parts of the spectrum is one of the most powerful tools in astrophysics.
Very cool. Yeah, so that definitely, once I can see now, especially that bridge between those two worlds, considering you're literally dealing with photons. So, that's
the first detection of helium came from the sun. It was measured, or people saw in the spectrum of the sun this strange line of something. Nobody knew what it was. And they called it helium because the sun in Greek is helios. Mm-hmm. Well, helium was not known yet on the Earth. I mean, people had not yet discovered helium gas on the Earth. They found it first in the solar spectrum, and then a few years later, not very many as I recall, they finally discovered, that's what this stuff is. It's helium, which we have right here on planet Earth.
Huh. Interesting. That's very cool. Actually, I do remember being taught that once again in high school and doing very bad. But I remember it was very intriguing. And I know it was very, very intricate in terms of some of the calculations that need to be done sometimes. So that was that's very cool though, because I think everyone's so used to just kind of looking up and seeing the stars, but we're not used to thinking that within that little beam of light that we're perceiving, or what we think is just a beam of light, is really broadcasting information.
Yeah. Maybe a whole solar system out there that we can't directly see yet because our telescopes don't have that kind of resolving power and the diameter to detect something as faint as that. But probably we do know we are discovering that there are planets out there around other stars, and that's one of the most exciting things in astronomy ever, to finally be able to say there are other worlds out there, and there's no reason to think those other worlds might not have other human beings, other beings on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm not sure if you caught that in the news about that planet that everyone was the M-class planet. I believe they were making the Star Trek reference. that in the Libra constellation. I don't know if you saw that.
I didn't see that one. No.
Yeah, I could probably dig that one up and send that to you. But yeah, it was the astronomers looking at it, and they've been looking at it for 11 years. They said that there's almost not a chance that there is life, like that there's almost not a chance that there isn't life on there, because of how what the conditions are. And it actually sounds like an interesting place. Like there's a band of the planet that essentially stays balmy all year round because of the way it kind of rotates around its sun.
Yeah, you can actually you can make a pretty good educated guess using mathematics of what the habitable zone is from a star. Knowing what kind of star you're dealing with, you then calculate how much light and heat get to a certain point in space, and then you ask yourself, well, what effect would this have on a planet? And that then determines a habitable zone. And so the next job is to find out whether there are any planets within that habitable zone. And that's just beginning to happen now, especially with the Kepler mission going up and detecting stars with planets that are very different than the planets that have been discovered so far, because they use a totally different technique. So it's a different way of defining planets entirely. It's more conducive to finding Earth-like planets. And so they are finding Earth-like planets, and they will find even more. And so I think that too will change humans' perspective if we can find a world that almost certainly has life on it, life different than ours.
Yeah, that mission that you're talking about, could you maybe share with our audience a little bit more about the specifics on that?
The way that measurements have been made so far of planets has been using the motion of the star itself with respect to the center of gravity. If you have, as we do have, planets going around the sun is not fixed in space. The sun moves back and forth a little bit in response to the tug of the planets. It's like a teeter-totter, it's like a teeter-totter with an 800-pound gorilla on one side and an ant on the other, okay? You can imagine that. Yeah, the center of gravity is pretty much going to be the center of the gorilla, but not exactly. And so you can determine the presence of planets by looking at the back-and-forth motion of the star. And interestingly, that star's motion can be determined how precisely? Well, about walking speed. Imagine a star that's a million miles in diameter, and you can measure its back-and-forth motion to within walking speed, like 5-10 miles per hour. Amazing. Wow. Now the Kepler mission is something very different, because this first method tends to find hot, heavy planets, because hot, heavy planets give the most wobble to the star, because the closer they are, the faster the orbit, and so it's more easy to detect the lines, and they shift more because the star is closer to the sun. There's more of a shift with respect to the gravitational center. All these things. The Kepler mission looks for something very different. It looks for transits. A transit is, for example, in our solar system, every so often, every 50 years or so, the planet Venus goes across the disk of the sun. Just it happens to line up. Venus happens to line up between us and the sun. And you can see Venus crossing the sun. Mm-hmm. Well, the Kepler mission is designed to monitor over 100,000 stars and look for that kind of transition, that transit of the planet in front of the star that causes a very slight dimming of the star's light. And a slight dimming can then be interpreted in terms of a planet. Mm-hmm. So this totally different way of looking at or detecting planets is up and running. It was launched over a year ago, and it's starting to bring in results. And we will find a lot of planets that probably are within habitable zones using the Kepler data.
Very, very cool. Yeah, this is exciting times, really, this day and age, with all the discoveries happening, both spiritually and scientifically. So this is very cool. Absolutely. Well, we're actually almost out of time here, so
we're
one
winding
more.
Down.
yeah. So let's make sure that we get another shameless plug in there for you with your books.
Shameless plug number 2. Go to thegodtheory.com, and there you can find links to buy both my books, The God Theory, and the new one, The Purpose Guided Universe, Believing in Einstein, Darwin, and God, at thegodtheory.com.
Cool. And then let me find your upcoming speaking engagement as well.
Oh, that's right. The upcoming speaking engagement is at the Deepak Chopra seminar called Scientists and Sages. Or maybe it's called Sages and Scientists, but if you look up one or the other, you'll find it. And it's going to take place, February the 25th, 26th, and 27th in Costa Mesa, California.
Very cool. And I went ahead and posted that links to that in the chat room for everyone, so they can check that out. Both to Dr. Heisch's website and the upcoming Sages and Scientists conference. I'm sure it'll be a great time.
Yeah, I intend to make it a good time.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm sure everything will work out fine between you and the other scientists there. So who knows? Something amazing might happen. You guys might agree on some things.
That could be. Well, I think what we will agree on, I'm certain of that, is that the universe is finely tuned. I mean, that's not an issue. That's accepted. The question is why, and that's where you have two divergent views on that. Why?
Mhm. Yeah. Very true. Very true. Well, thank you for hanging out here with us for the past.
You're welcome.
And a very informative time. And like I said, I love just all the grounded scientific data. It's beautiful.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, great. So, thanks everyone in the chat room and listening to us live and streaming in the archives as well. We'll be back once again every Tuesday and Thursday for now at 12:30 Pacific Standard Time, bringing you all the information major media tends to shy away from. So until next time, everyone, rock on and have a good one.
Crescent